You ready?
Yeah, we're ready.
Good morning. I'd like to call this meeting to order, the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning. It is great to see everybody in person for what, only the third time maybe in 2 years? But it's anyways, glad to have everybody here this morning. First item I'd like to actually under the agenda changes and or announcements, a couple things. One, as usual over the summer, I will ask a member from the city, the suburbs and the county to meet as an advisory group regarding recommendations for the board and its committees. That will take place over the summer. In September, they'll make recommendations back to the board regarding those positions and or appointments. Second, I'd like to take an opportunity to recognize Jim Healy from DuPage County, who been on the board since 2019, and Jim is retiring. And this will be your last meeting. Jim, if you want to come up, I'd like, on behalf of the CMAP board, to present you with a little token of our appreciation.
There you go. Just collecting all of the.
Are you missing as a
Yeah,
council?
and we'll do
As a council of mayors. There you go, Jim. On behalf of the board, we'd like to thank you for your service
very much.
to CMAP and your time and commitment over the.
Thank you
over the
very much.
years.
Can you pose?
Oh.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
In the back.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Bad.
Okay, with that in mind, I'll
Yeah, roll call.
ask the roll call for the roll call.
And since we're back into regular session, I'll do the roll call first, but then we can get on without having to do roll call for every single vote, given that we've got here quorum and no disaster declaration. Mayor Bennett,
Present.
Frank Beal,
Present.
President Brawley,
Present.
Mayor Darch, Paul Goodrich,
Present.
Jim Healy,
Here.
Nina Itamudia,
Present.
Mayor Noak,
Here.
President Reinbold,
Here.
Mayor Rotering, Stefan Schaefer,
Here.
Carolyn Schofield,
Here.
Ann Sheehan, Matt Walsh,
Here.
Diane Williams, Leanne Redden,
Yeah.
and Dr. Koros Mahammadian.
And we have a quorum.
We do, and I'll remind folks that if you wouldn't mind using your microphone when you are speaking, it does allow us, the folks that are participating online, to hear you. If you need a restroom, they are just straight out that exit door. There's men's and women's on your left-hand side there. So
Next item is the approval of the minutes, and Aaron, there's a notation here regarding.
yes, there is a notation. We did notice that there was a minor Scrivener's error in the board minutes. In the adjournment section, the word meeting was omitted in the sentence. Chair Bennett noted the cancellation of the executive committee meeting. So we'll make that correction.
And if not, I'll entertain a motion to moved and seconded. Any questions again on the minutes? Aaron, call the roll.
I don't need to call the roll.
Oh, that's right.
Signify by aye.
I get to do my thing again, right?
I know
All in
you
favor,
do.
signify by a vote of aye.
Aye.
Opposed, voted no. Motion carries. Thank you. I'm gonna have to get used to doing that again.
Great,
Under the executive director's report.
great. Well, again, nice to see you all in person again. It's been a little bit of time. We do have a full agenda today, but we will dedicate most of the time to talking about our plan of action for regional transit. But just a few updates here with Jim Healy rotating off the board. DuPage mayors and managers, in cooperation with DuPage County, has appointed Mayor Grasso from Burr Ridge to replace him. We look forward to welcoming him in September. And I already went out and met with him last week to talk to him a little bit about our responsibilities in advance of our September meeting here.
Gary's a good guy. I've known him for some time.
Yeah, so he is very excited to be a part of the board. And so you'll see him in September. On the legislative front here, for one of the final acts of the session, the General Assembly passed the FY24 budget that largely mirrors the governor's budget. That $50.6 billion budget includes investments in many priorities that are aligned with On to 2050. But again, we have heard, and I'm sure you all have read, that the future economic uncertainty and the exhaustion of federal aid is on the horizon here, which complicates that budget outlook moving forward. Again, our legislative team will be here and present a few notes on the budget and our legislation that we were pushing here and some transit related bills that advanced this session later on the agenda. I wanted to also give you a quick update on our Safe Travel for All program. We have successfully executed the grant with Federal Highways Administration. I'm told that we are first in the nation to get that over the finish line. So while that may seem pretty wonky, we have had a couple of peers reach out to say, how did you do that? We're still struggling getting this to final agreement here. But, this really is, it's a $5 million commitment to work with our counties to make sure that they all have safety action plans that comply with the federal law, which then unlocks federal infrastructure funding for safety projects for all of our counties, all of our communities across the region. So we are sprinting to get those done so that we can help make sure that our counties are eligible for that next round of hard infrastructure funding that's available here. Again, our hope is that this multi-year effort really improves traffic safety in our region. That's in a way that's comprehensive, that's equitable, that's data-driven, and in a collaborative way here. So we're hoping to take some best practices, for instance, from communities that maybe have safety problems related to children in schools or safety problems related to seniors and crossing the road, and really sort of take those and shuffle them together to make sure that all of our counties have that rich sort of safety action plan. And so that we can help support people walking, rolling, and riding bicycles be safer in their communities. I also wanted to share with you an update on an application we recently submitted for the 290 and Blue Line Corridor in partnership with IDOT and with CTA. This important project would help create a unified vision for the corridor and create a governance structure to execute on that vision here. So I know many of you are familiar with the CREATE program, a program that untangles the passenger rail and the freight rail system that we have here. That 290 corridor is just incredibly complex. It's got 13 bridges, it's got a railroad, it's got CTA, it's got IDOT, and it's got a plan for high occupancy toll lanes as well. And so we thought that it would be helpful for both those parties to continue to work together. So this grant application would pilot that partnership that would create a similar framework and structure, management structure as the CREATE program here that would bring in communities and partners along the corridor as well to be a part of the development process, and then to prioritize opportunities to pursue federal grants through a project management office. Again, grant application was submitted a couple of weeks ago. We hope to hear back maybe in the next 4 to 6 months here, but we're excited about this. We think it would be a really great structure for both those parties.
Total grant numbers?
$3.5 million was the grant ask, and there's no required match for this grant. So we have both CTA and IDOT at the table as partners in this as well. So a quick note just related to our involvement with Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson's transition. I had served on the Transportation Transition Subcommittee. Our staff here did a bang-up job really facilitating the meetings, writing the report. So kudos to them for all of the time that they dedicated to this. But wanted to just share that transit was a big component of that conversation and really understanding how important transit options are and the connectivity of transit and transportation to the rest of the region as well. The committee will submit that report to Mayor Johnson in the coming weeks, but we'll keep you informed as we continue to be involved in that conversation. And then just in closing, the board does not typically meet in July or August, but recognizing we do want to bring you recommendations on the PART project in September. You will be hearing from me over the summer as we begin to develop those recommendations. I will be reaching out to you and maybe scheduling some small group discussions around where we're at, where we're headed, and where we'll be going so that you're prepared for September. So we do have a special meeting in September, the board and the MPO Policy Committee. So it will be September 13th. And then we will have another joint meeting in October, which is our regularly scheduled joint meeting. So with that, I am happy to answer any questions of the board.
Any questions for Erin? None more. Being we will move on. Next item is under procurements and contracts. We do have two. And Alicia?
Good morning, Mayor Bennett, board members. We have two items on the agenda this morning for your approval. CMAP seeks to improve regional traffic safety in a comprehensive, data-informed, and collaborative way. The program will provide technical assistance to 6 counties to develop countywide safety action plans using a regional framework and building on existing efforts and addressing local issues. Staff requests authorization to enter into a contract with ACOM for a 2-year term with 3 one-year option renewals for an amount not to exceed $425,000. Second item, CMAP intends to engage the expertise of a third-party consultant as a neutral evaluator of CMAP's capacity building C-Build program, a comprehensive program with a hyperlocal approach designed to help governments throughout northeastern Illinois face obstacles due to fiscal pressure and lack of staff. The RFP has been released and vendor selection is expected to occur in mid-July. Staff requests authorization to enter into a contract for a one-year term for RFP 278 Project Management and Development, a program evaluation of capacity building activities for an amount not to exceed $75,000.
There are two items there. Any
Motion.
questions on them? If not, I'll entertain.
Motion
a
approved both.
Move to approve
Second.
and seconded. Any questions again? If not, all in favor, signify by a vote of aye.
Aye.
Opposed, vote of no, and the motion carries. Thank you, Lish. Moving on, item 6. The tip conformity, Russell.
All right, included in your packet today is the ON2 2050 tip conformity analysis and tip amendment 23-08. The CMAP region is a non-attainment area for ozone. In fact, based on preliminary data, all but one of our ozone monitors are already in violation of the current ozone standards. That means that we have some work to do regarding ozone and air quality, and you should expect to hear more about this at future meetings. That being said, CMAP is required to demonstrate that the long-range plan and tip conform to the motor vehicle emissions budget for our region through a regional emissions analysis of transportation projects in the tip. The regional emissions analysis uses the latest planning assumptions and socioeconomic forecasts that are in the ON2 2050 plan update. Specifically, projects in the tip subject to air quality analysis requirements demonstrate when modeled that the region does not exceed our motor vehicle emissions budget, which is shown near the end of your memo that was in your packet. On a side note, I wanted to mention that the project shown on the conformity memo could have waited until the next conformity amendment cycle. However, a key cog in our conformity work, Leroy Koss, will be retiring, and we wanted the younger staff to get the opportunity to work with him one more time before he retires and benefit from his expert knowledge on this matter. As stated in the memo, results of the emissions modeling demonstrate that regional emissions are below our region's motor vehicle emissions budget, which is required to demonstrate conformity for the ON2 2050 long-range plan and the tip. At this time, staff requests approval of a finding of conformity for tip amendment 23-08 by the CMAP board. And if there are any questions, I'll answer them at this time.
Any questions regarding that? If not, I'll entertain a motion to
Motion approved.
moved and seconded. Again, any questions regarding that? If not, all in favor, signify by a vote of aye.
Aye.
Opposed, vote of no, the motion carries. Thank you, Russ. Okay, under 6.02, consideration and some suggestions on CMAP board bylaws. Amy, are you going to make that presentation? Yes, you are.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to see you all today in person. A few things that we'll run through. The majority of the Scribners, I'll call it, are just recommendations from the attorney. So I'll kind of put those aside since those are usually a word or two and not intended to change the meaning of the document. The first, I'll call it more substantive one, is related to audiovisual conference participation in the meeting. And that was just an update that the attorney is recommending post-COVID to make it a little bit clearer for how members are able to participate in the meetings via audio or video participation. So that pretty much just points to the Open Meetings Act and says we need to make sure that we're always compliant with it. The next item on there, again, the attorney just recommended some clarification related to the 4/5 vote and making sure that it's very clear that that's when approval is required pursuant to the act or the bylaws. If you continue forward, we did talk about last month in consent agenda. We have the practice of using a consent agenda here at CMAP from time to time, but we didn't really demonstrate it in our bylaws. So this is just recommending that we document our current processes and is the similar practice to most cities and villages of having the opportunity to use a consent. Please remember that if we do use a consent, you're always welcome as a member to request to pull an item off the consent agenda and discuss it at the meeting. So it's simply a way of trying to be efficient in your meeting and invest your time in your highest priority items. If we continue through the other one, thank you to one of our members. They pointed out we don't actually say who's on the executive committee. It's been the long-standing practice of CMAP to have 2 members from the city of Chicago, 2 members from suburban and Cook County, and 2 members from the College County or Collar counties. But always, of course, important to document things so that going forward, it's clear to you and to anyone else in the region who the members are. So thank you for that suggestion. Fast forwarding to Article 4, we've had a number of different conversations about the powers of the executive committee. Most notably through COVID, as we've been looking at coming back to in-person meetings, there have been times we haven't always been able to have a quorum or we've been really tight on it. So we tried to come up with some strategies with the attorney that might help the executive committee do your work when you otherwise don't have a meeting. So for any new members, you typically don't have meetings in the months of July and August and December, occasionally April, because sometimes folks have spring break and that's a time when we sometimes aren't able to have a meeting. So with that in mind, it does allow the procurements to go through for items that have already been approved by the board. Keep in mind, CMAP's budget is 100% reimbursement from either the federal funding source, a grant funding source, or IDOT. And so the really preponderance of our work is approved with your budget each year. So we have an agreement between CMAP and the MPO policy board that as we approve that budget and then IDOT approves it. So that budget stays the same unless we actually affect a budget amendment. So that's a little different than what I experienced in some of my city experience. This would also allow the executive committee to look at change orders if they happen while the board is not meeting. I think the last one from the last meeting, we tried to tighten up this language. So what the attorney has here is that this is in Article 4, Section 2, is that if the board is unable to meet for 14 days, it essentially hasn't met for 14 days, and is not able to meet for another 14 days, in other words, a month, that the executive committee has the authority to exercise the customary operations and finance functions of the board. So again, we tried to make it clear that in the lower section that in no case does it allow you to approve the long range plan. It's not intended to address anything policy, but it is intended to do the day-to-day operations. In that same section, we left the number of hours open because you could make the hours of notification to board members either 72 or 96. You could make it anything else also, but 72 and 96 are what you see earlier in the document currently as it relates to getting the chairman the agenda 96 hours in advance and getting the board members the agenda 72 hours in advance. Right now, it's CMAP's practice to provide those to you a week ahead of time, but the bylaws require the 72 hours. Finally, we did hear from you guys related to what the total authorization of the executive committee is. Right now, we have it in here at 500,000. This one's a tricky one because sometimes because we do cover the whole region, sometimes we are accepting grants and or other allocations that are on the larger side. A couple examples would be like the RIA grant, which was 1.2 million. Again, all of these are coming in as grant funding sources from other entities, but this is one I don't know that there's a right or wrong number. It's just one that we'll need to select and that folks are comfortable with and that we can try to conduct the work. Going forward, you'll note these are not in highlighted because you've already approved them, but it was the recommendation to include the public participation update that you guys approved at your last meeting, actually embed them in and include them in your bylaws. So you'll see that in Article 6. Again, these are updated so that we can have public participation virtually in our meetings. And I think that is the majority. We talked last month, Article 7. Again, it was attorney recommendation that we adjust the the executive director's authority to approve items to the state statute. That way it will always adjust whenever the state statute adjusts. And I believe that is the changes that are proposed in here. Happy to answer any questions.
Conversation, yes.
Thanks. Thank you, Amy, for all the work and Aaron, everybody on doing on this. A couple more questions came up since the last meeting, and thanks for the changes on the naming the executive committee members. So now I'm going to lose it. But we had a discussion last night about that operations and finance language in Article 4, where that was trying to be a limitation on what the executive board would do. And I just, to me, the term operations and finance could be further refined just to show that it's a limitation. I think the exclusion you were making was policy, like the executive board wouldn't be making policy decisions, but to me, that kind of kept a broader brush, giving the executive board more. I get the whole reason for this. I think it's good. In other organizations, you let your executive committee do things when you can't meet. The other thing that wasn't defined in the bylaws and I thought was interesting is just maybe there should be a statement that says the executive committee meeting schedule or the meeting schedule. I know we approve our board one and that is in the statute. We have to approve that and put it out there. Perhaps there should just be a line in our bylaws that says meetings of the board and the committee will be published once a year, will be so that it's clear that all the committee meetings, and I think we do that by practice, schedule them and put them out there, but that we're actually saying in here so that I read this like a lawyer. And so I think worst case scenario. So I'm just trying to read it as if we had a board or a crazy exec committee that your bylaws are your blueprint for action. So to me, that's a missing piece, kind of specifying when the normal meetings of the executive committee would be so that your board knows that at the beginning of the year, everybody knows that. And so you have some sense of where this may happen. The other question that came up from several sources, and I think you'll hear it from others, is CMAP, the voting rule is 4/5 of this board voting. And I think that was very debated at the time the statute was passed and by design to make sure that that no groups feelings could be not respected by a final decision of the board. So the question came up is why with a 6-person executive committee having a 4/5 vote other than it's technically 2/3 right now, because you need 4 votes on exec to do anything that's a 2/3, but shouldn't that track? So should there be a clause in here that any action taken by the executive committee would follow with a 4/5? So you'd require 5 votes of the executive committee to do something. I think that from the city's perspective, from the suburbs perspective, that gives everybody sort of the same stake in the decision that we currently have as the board. So if we're going to give additional power to the exec committee, that made sense. And I heard that from some suburban people. I would think I'd hear it from the city people as well. If that was.
Yeah, from a historical standpoint, from day one, since we formed CMAP, I've been on an executive committee for every one of those meetings. And I historically, I mean, the executive committee is usually, I don't think I've ever seen a point where it was not unanimous, usually in those decisions or recommendations to the full board. Again, it's a technical thing or even a legal thing that you're throwing out there, whether or not, again, it binds the executive committee because it's not just the vote, but it's the quorum created to vote that. And I think as we do with this board, that's been the problem we've had, certainly challenging, even over COVID, which was an opportunity to still meet virtually, was trying to get a quorum. I wasn't happy with that when we first formed this organization, that we're binded to that type of, I don't think I've seen any organization I'm aware of that's required to do what's in that statute about having a supermajority vote. So be it. We've lived with that for many, many, many years. But as we have seen and experienced probably more so over the last 3 years at least, that we have trouble, getting a quorum. And that, because we only meet once a month, there are financial operational things that this organization must continue to do, and without, as being suggested, a little bit of leeway here with the executive committee on some approvals is number one, but also number two, further binding possibly the executive committee with a supermajority vote. I mean, if you want to do it, it's fine. Experience-wise, I don't think we've ever had a problem with that contentious executive committee where it was not, if not always, in a unanimous vote. But again, those kind of provisions just further restrict going forward, and something that's been a burden to the agency with those high numbers of levels of approval. Understand, we've always shared power. We've always shared voting rights with this organization from day one. City, suburban, county, it's always worked out. That's why it was set up that way. So representation from each of those regions is equal, and it is, and it'll always be that way. But I'm just throwing out some comments here. Whatever the board wants to do, but these are suggestions just from an operational standpoint on keeping this agency functioning during times when we don't meet, and certainly in times when for some reason we can't get a quorum ourselves. So just some comments.
Yeah, if I may just emphasize one point is that the authorities that we wanted to discuss with you today was really about the operational functions of the agency. So for example, if I need modeling data in order to be able to process all of the data that informs all of your phase one engineering studies over the summertime, and we aren't able to get a quorum of the board, but I do need to move forward on some action that's already been approved in the budget. My hope would be is that, we wouldn't be the hang up from our communities being able to push forward projects because of that. So really just structured around the operations of this, but I do recognize that, Mayor Darch, you do have the definitions could be something that we could potentially work on.
And again, the function of the organization itself starts with the budget as explained in the beginning of the year. So any items that come up are not extraordinary. They're not somebody's pulling some project or something out of their hat and give the executive committee the authority to approve it. These are things that work through and operate through the existing budget that has been approved by the board at the start of the year. The implementation over the year is based upon needs and wants and timing of operations to say, hey, we're going to go ahead with this, or maybe we need to move this up. It's still in the budget, so everybody's clear. I think we all understand that there's nothing that's ever gone extraordinary before, and if it had to go before this full board for new consideration or above budget changes. That is not being recommended here. But again, historically, we've always operated this way. But again, we've been handcuffed now for the last couple of years, which is kind of throwing it back to the board members. If I was assured that everybody would attend every board meeting going forward, and we had a quorum, then we wouldn't even have this discussion. But things have changed a little bit. So that's why I'm turning these recommendations. Jim, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you. When I first got this, and again, I believe that once you folks sit down with Karen, because I have all the faith in the world with Karen, to tighten up some definitions and things of that nature. I actually worked with her on the tracks bill. So I remember, you dotting every I and making sure every definition was perfect on that. I've had the opportunity to talk to several of the Collier County's chairman's executives or whoever, their staff, and they wanted me to express that the genius of CATS/NIPSI/CMAP has always been, in fact, when I teach a course on metropolitan government, I always talk about the genius of it, because the area was so fractured for so many years that by requiring the 4/5 vote, you required everybody to work together. You forced them to do that. So the idea is that it's a very simple fix. I think that all you really need to do is on page 29, after Article 4, Section 1, just add in a new 2 that has a voting requirement, and just say, as you've said, say before that any item before the executive committee must have 5 affirmative votes in order to pass. It's a very simple thing. I think if you're putting people on the executive committee, you're putting people on the executive committee who are going to show up for everything. These are the people who are most involved in this organization, or the people who are going to be showing up. So I don't think you're going to have any problem getting 5. In fact, you're probably going to get 6. And again, I understand that there's never been an issue on this. And again, that's because the genius of all this, if I could say something genius came out of Springfield, is that the 4/5 vote was required. So by putting in it must have 5 affirmative votes. Then you make sure that that there'll always be one person from Chicago voting for it. There'll always be one person from the suburban areas, suburban Cook voting for it, and one person from the Collier counties voting for it. You always leave room for an outlier, but this assures that. And I think that it is something that we don't want to ever start veering away from, because it's what has made this organization so strong over all these years and actually growing. Where several others, kind of get it. And when I teach this, they go, how do people get along? I said, they're forced to. it's wonderful watching the engineers for the counties and the suburbs and everything getting together, approving projects and things of that nature, which are needed for the entire region. And they understand that, there's a pressure here, there's pressure there, and they were able to craft it together. And I think that's what we need to do, is to keep that and just insert that one paragraph in there.
I don't like to use the word force. Certainly over all the years of this organization, it's that we want to. And certainly there's been a couple contentious issues, but there's such balance in the organization from not only this board, but certainly one or two times with the MPO board that things worked out. But again, I'm not, if the board wants to, make that a supermajority on the executive committee, all I can tell you is that all the years that's never really been a problem. But if you seek that as language in there, that doesn't bother me. So.
I think, Karen and I talked on the phone a couple times and we said, I guess we're all both pessimists or something. You always say that this board is wonderful, but anytime I passed anything for the county over the 25 years I was on the county board, it was always not what today is happening, but what could be tomorrow. And I always took the worst possible approach to it, that there might be somebody trying to, move things in a certain direction that would make it much easier for them to do this way. And again, you said you never remember even having a no vote unless everybody voted no. And I was talking to JD, John also, or Noak, and sorry. But everybody gets along and they move forward and they move this stuff forward. So I don't think it's going to be an issue. I think it just puts everybody in the Collier counties and the city of Chicago and in Cook at ease that there will always have to be at least one person in agreement from their area. And that's what I think is the greatest thing about this.
Other comments?
Hi. I think the first point about adding definitions makes sense about what is under the umbrella of operational. I don't think we need to change it back to 5-6. I think the 4-6 is fine, considering the constant issues that we've been hearing every meeting about quorum, about CMAP being able to continue operationalizing things. As somebody who has a very large budget in my work life and having to operationalize things, I feel the pain of the CMAP board and Aaron as the executive director. So I disagree with changing the language for the vote, but I do agree that a definition would make sense in order to make sure that we feel comfortable with the scope of work that they would be approving without the full board.
If I could just repeat, I mean, you said yourself, you've never had a problem with the executive committee.
Again, though, that's true. But the whole reason this is being brought up is because of quorums and what's required of a quorum, and then what's then restricted of a vote without a quorum. So it's all about the quorum. It wasn't ever about issues, or as far as I was concerned, but not only the executive committee, but even the board of directors, it's all about quorum. And the requirement of that statute about having a supermajority vote, which is great with me, but again, it's also based upon the quorum present. And that is what has been the restriction of us not being able to have a meeting, or not being actually years ago, not being able to actually vote on anything because you have to have X number of people there to be able to vote.
And again,
let alone the supermajority vote itself.
Right, we're not talking about the board as itself. We're talking about the executive committee, and I'm going to pretty much guess that anybody you put on the executive committee is someone who is very, in tune with this organization, very dedicated to it. And I think you're always going to be able to get your quorums on that. I think it would be very, unusual not to have a quorum, especially if you do as Karen suggested, and that is put in the dates for those meetings in advance, so that, they know that.
Well, Jimmy, that's true. And even we have dates starting in the beginning of the year for the entire board too, but that doesn't guarantee that somebody's going to show up.
But we're not talking about the entire board. We're talking about 6 people that you're going to be choosing.
Which is tied into the board meetings. Normally, the executive committee only usually meets with the board itself.
I was gonna let you finish. No, go ahead.
So we've not, have we ever met separately from the board?
No, the executive committee always proceeds,
With the board.
meets after the board meeting.
There's no problem.
Well, again,
Well, if there's
if the board doesn't have a
quorum.
quorum, sometimes that's also reflected in the members of the executive committee. But, one's not different sometimes from the other.
I'll just make one comment, then a suggestion. The scenario, it's funny that we've passed and accomplished a lot of things at this board. But this is bylaws, and I think that's why everybody's so focused on this. Once you change this, you got to abide by it or change it again, which is very rare in the years that I've been sitting here. We've never had an issue with the vote, either at the board. I've never been on exec. But I think, and Chairman, you would probably agree with this. Anything less than majority, supermajority on exec to get something approved in this scenario we're talking about would be unwise for everybody on exec, right? If we took a hard vote at exec committee, you know that that's something that probably should be aired at the full board. I think the adding the fifth vote probably shouldn't get in the way of any business that you're going to do at exec, because remember, this is in a sort of an emergency situation where we can't meet. So I support that. I support all the rest of the changes in there. Honestly, I think my position would be a suggestion that we punt on this until a future meeting and have some folks that include, representative from the six of the six exec, maybe not the exec, to come up with something to
Right.
recommend.
And again, we're only talking about operations. This isn't some surprise or some outside new thing coming. It's just basically in order for the organization, the administration to function and operate. Again, during the months that we may not be around. As a suggestion, this is not, this is not something come through the side door. This is based upon, as we've done in the past, as we go forward, the operations of the organization. But
I was just going to suggest, I agree with Matt on taking this section out, but wondering if we should move forward on the rest of the changes and then be able to bring this executive committee portion back.
that's fine too. If the board is is in agreement with that. Yeah.
If we're gonna do it, let's do it all at once. I don't see a point of pulling it apart. If we're gonna make a comprehensive update of the bylaws, we should do that in one entirety. That way, all of its entirety can be looked at and everybody can analyze how the different things affect it. So, I mean, there's no point of pulling it separately. We might as well have a working group and do it, and make any changes that need to be done and do it at an appropriate time all at once.
Well, I have a question then, because I would feel more comfortable with there being a definition of operations, and then I would vote to keep it at 4.6. So until we come up with a definition of operations, I think it's wise to punt this particular section until we come up with definitions that the board can look. From my vantage point, I wouldn't want to vote on that because I would just vote no on changing it.
I get the feel that let's take a pass on this in the next meeting. We'll clear up whatever language we need to clear up, and then the decision on whether to require exec that forfeits or not can be amended, I guess, at that time. If
Jerry, do you want a motion to table it till the September meeting?
the chair
Or
recognizes
is that
it's,
soon enough or to an uncertain date? Just
well, we won't meet again
table.
until September, so that's certainly give plenty of time.
And I'll say, we're going to have a packed meeting agenda in September. So perhaps it'd be helpful if we had a city, a caller, and a suburban member volunteer to be part of a subcommittee to help us work through this over the summer.
I would like to volunteer.
Karen, I'll second that.
Scott?
Sounds good.
The chair recognizes that, and as I indicated in the beginning, I will, through an advisory to the board, let you know who those people are, if they want to let Aaron know, and we'll send them a memorandum regarding it.
Okay.
No, as far as the motion, the motion was not made, so the chair will, we'll just take this to the next meeting.
Great.
Thanks, Amy. Okay, moving on to plan of action on the regional transit
That's right.
part report. Aaron?
Thank you. So we have a lot of content to cover with you today on the plan of action for regional transit. But before I hand it over to my team, I just wanted to emphasize a couple points for the board to frame our discussion with you here today. There is value to all of our communities regarding our transit system here across the region, and what this fiscal cliff means to our region here. So just next slide, transit is really truly about people, and you see that reflected in RTA's Transit is the Answer report. But we are working on transit solutions for the people of our region and getting them to where they need to go faster, reliably. It's about access. It's about access to healthcare. It's about access to economic opportunity, and really making sure that families and people across our region can have that high quality of life that our 2050 plan puts forth here. You know, this funding crisis has the potential to decimate our transit system here, cripple local economies, really thinking about the impact that this could have on our downtowns across the region that have built themselves on our region's strong transit assets here. So our initial scenario review says that what it could mean if you were to cut 20% of transit's budget could equate to a 40% cut in service, that you would see 100 towns and cities and villages across the region lose metro service, you know, that 20 Chicago neighborhoods and 6 suburbs could lose CTA train access, you know, that across our PACE and our CTA systems that 150 plus bus routes could be cut. You know, these are drastic cuts. It's more draconian than I think any of us have ever experienced, and then more than we would ever hope to experience here across the region here. You know, and I think as we think about this, we're paying attention to what's happening in other parts of the country and how they're beginning to address these challenges. You know, and just recently we saw that in San Francisco, the BART system got a credit downgrade, right? So again, this downward spiral of activities related to our transit operations really is within reach here. So I want to just pause here and think about this for a second. And if you want to contribute to the conversation, awesome. If you just want to think in your mind here, you know, how would your communities be impacted if these cuts were realized? Right? And how would the region? Yeah.
When I think about a cut,
Oh, if you wouldn't mind turning your microphone on for folks. Thank you.
when I think about potential cuts, I think about things like how would this negatively impact access to things like employment opportunities, housing opportunities, access to medical care and facilities, especially in terms of public transport. Many of our residents depend on that. And I think actually enhanced funding in that regard is something to strongly consider. I know part of this conversation is about, you know, how do we fund it? We have to be creative about that. But I also think in terms of transit-oriented development, the ongoing investment that I'm seeing in my region, one for the village of Richton Park, we're currently in the process of, I'm going to define it as reimagining our town center. It's been 10 years since our initial plan, and the landscape has changed dramatically since then. So it's critical to make that that investment in the planning stages to ensure that our constituents have access to transit. I also think about in our region, the city of Harvey, the huge investment that's being made in their train station. And up and down the line, it's critical to make reinvestment in those opportunities in our communities. So just a couple quick thoughts on why it's important to maintain this.
Thank you, President Reinbold. I know we have special guests here as well that want to talk to you. So let me keep going. So I think those are very real examples that Mayor Reinbold put on the table there, right? Is that communities are planning for transit growth and they're making land use and planning decisions based on this future state that we all want. You know, and so earlier this year, we noted that CTA added Blue Line trains to absorb extra ridership for the influx of commuters that usually use the Kennedy, which is getting this 3-year makeover here. So we are seeing the value of transit when we do need to upgrade our highway facilities. But, you know, if that service were stopped and if you weren't able to add access capacity, you know, our concern is that the growing congestion across our region will really hurt our economy here. And, you know, again, we highlighted, I think, a number of the places across our region that have really built their reputation on strong transit access here, whether it's Richton Park or it's Des Plaines, Crystal Lake, you heard about Harvey, many others. They're really banking on transit-oriented development to help their communities grow and provide options for their residents to get around here. So considering what these service cuts would do to the people who rely on transit to also get to entertainment venues across our region, Ravinia strongly relies on that Metro train showing up. Our sports events, activities, right? They also see huge influxes of riders when they're sporting events and entertainment events. So it's tourism as well as it is, you know, people in our region just getting to and from work or school. You know, we've also heard that the Bears decision They want a place that's multimodal and accessible as well. Now, where that ends up, well, who remains to be seen. But, you know, I think it's also one of the primary reasons we heard Google was interested in being downtown, because the access to transit was second to none, and they want to attract a highly qualified workforce to their downtown Chicago campus here. So again, you know, we're not saying that any of these things would exactly happen and the cuts would exactly happen like that, but I wanted to paint the picture of where we're at and why we're so concerned about this as a region and why it's so critical that we partner with RTA in making sure that our transit system is strong here. So we'll have some topic specific discussions here next. And so I'm turning it over to Bill Barnes.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. I am not a special guest. I am CMAP's Deputy of Regional Policy and Implementation. And you're going to see me twice today. So I'm here to talk about how to pay for it. And that's basically to give you all an update on the work that we've been doing as a group and as stakeholders to understand, you know, solutions to the looming fiscal cliff, the operational shortfall that we've all been talking about. And, you know, this conversation has involved discussions of new funding sources, but also, as you'll hear from a special guest, you know, exploration of operation efficiencies and savings, which are a necessary component to the work that we're doing here. So as we explore potential solutions, it's required us as a group to take a deep dive into funding solutions and transit funding, and also the costs to try and better understand the true causes for the shortfall that we are facing. And this has involved outreach and engagement and involvement of a wide range of entities and individuals. We've been talking with the counties, we've been talking with IDOT, we've been talking with the tollway, and we'll continue to be talking to them, the service boards, you know, as we better understand the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead to additional funding for regional transit. And recognizing that the region's not alone. You know, we have peer transit systems that are facing similar situations. We're benchmarking to them, and we're also taking a look at, you know, the potential cost and operational efficiencies that they're achieving and how they relate to the options that we're taking into consideration. So as we build this foundation, we are entering into the stage where we are actually considering funding options. As Aaron rightly pointed out, this is not a situation where we can cut our way out of it. You know, as I said, we're going to be exploring efficiencies, but, you know, new funding is a necessary component to the path forward. So to that end, as we're exploring these financial options, we're looking at their pros, their cons, their costs, their benefits, and forecasting, you know, how those could, you know, benefit transit in the future. So if you go to the next slide, you know, I'm going to turn the mic over real quickly to Tom Katarik. His face is, I'm sure, familiar to all of you. He's here on behalf of Derek Douglas, who's the co-chair of the How to Pay for It subcommittee or discussion group in the PART process. You know, Derek is the president of the Civic Committee, and Tom is noted here as the senior VP for Transportation Infrastructure at the Civic Committee, where he joined after serving as Deputy Executive Director at CMAP. So, Tom, if you could come up and just give some reflections on the conversations that we've been having and sort of your thoughts as to the path forward.
Welcome back, Tom.
Morning, everybody. Familiar ground here. Been through a few bylaws conversations in the past, so a little less hot this time. So first and foremost, I want to say thanks to the staff who've been putting together an excellent process for this. It's been a lot of work, and it's deserving of a lot of work because the problem and the issue that's facing transit is enormous. This is singular in our lifetime. This is, you know, a crisis that we're facing for transit. I'll say that the senior business leaders in Chicago, the CEOs that are represented in the commercial club and the civic committee have been longtime supporters of transit, going back to our founding, 1877, for 140 plus years. We've cared a lot about this, and this is a seminal moment. So the charge that you have is very big, and it's very different. You know, this isn't about plugging a hole. This is about resetting and thinking about what transit's place is in the future of our city, and it's essential for the long-time economic growth of the city. The revenue piece of this is also big. This is very much unlike anything else we face. $730 million shortfall Just to put that in context, when we all banded together as a state to pass Rebuild Illinois, one of the components of that capital bill was a 19-cent gas tax increase that was indexed to inflation. That was statewide, and that raised $1.2 billion. And we have a $730 million annual shortfall that'll increase and quickly get to $1 billion and more. So if we were to do that statewide, we're thinking about, I mean, it would take a 12-cent gas tax, at least statewide, just to plug the hole. So I think first and foremost, you know, for our work is we are really, really focused on shrinking that number of $730 million. And so this, you know, this pursuit and what's going to happen, I will say, you know, the paramount here is reform has to accompany revenue. It's essential to being successful. If you even look at our peer agencies in New York who were successful in going down to Albany and dealing with some of their revenue fiscal cliff issues, they were able to go to Albany with efficiencies of $400 million, a commitment. I will say that our work, you're going to hear about revenues today, but everyone that is on the steering committee that really represent the region and people who I think are very well respected in the field. You think of folks like Carol Brown, former CTA board chair, Randy Blankenhorn knows a few things about transit planning and running a Department of Transportation. Jackie Grimshaw from the Center of Neighborhood Technology. The last time we led a reform of transit in 1983, she was literally in the room where it happened when she worked for Hill, Washington. These are serious people who I think are going to make recommendations that are in line with the seriousness of the problem. But the revenue piece of this is essential. And so you won't hear too much about what those, you know, efficiencies are, but I think that they're essential and they'll be coming back to you soon. The other piece of this isn't again about plugging holes. This is the time to really reset the entire transit system, our governance, to look at it deeply, to look at financing and look at operations. And I encourage you to really be open to that conversation. For almost way too long, we've looked at what happened in 1983 as if it came from tablets on Mount Sinai. It was not etched in stone. And the formulas that were created back then may not be perfect. And I think it's important for this process where you get folks who have done this before, who are senior leaders in their field, to have strong analysis, outside experts looking at national best practices to come to you and to really think about what is great and what is best for the region. I think that's an essential component of that. And frankly, I think that that is going to be whether or not we are going to be successful in even addressing the short-term problem. The charge from the General Assembly has been very clear. They look to you to come back to them to deal with this problem holistically. This is not just a revenue issue. And I think that that's been lacking up until this point. And I think you're going to be the tip of the spear of leading a reform of transit that, one, is necessary, and two, is a long time coming. So I think Bill and the team will probably give you a rundown, but I'm happy to answer questions if we're doing that.
We're speechless, Tom.
Under the presentation. Oh, Frank. Could you pass the mic over? Thank you.
Sorry.
No.
Just a comment, well, first of all, a thank you to you and Randy and other members of the steering committee. I know it's a lot of work. You've been working hard and we appreciate all the work and pass it on to your colleagues. It's very helpful to have that sounding board of civic leaders. With regard to transit funding, it's been clear that we have underfunded transit for decades. It's shameful how little investment we've made in transit over the years. And I compare it to our aviation effort. We've been for decades a leader nationally, internationally on aviation. And to stay up, we are now spending billions of dollars to improve Midway and O'Hare. And we ought to have that same mentality when it comes to transit. Transit shouldn't be an afterthought. We absolutely must do that. But what I'm hearing is that in September, October, you and the staff of CMAP are going to bring before the CMAP board a request that's going to include substantial increases in revenue. I'm interested to know about the efficiency side of it, but in any case, there's going to be a lot of revenue. And as a taxpayer, I'm likely to support that. Very much so. But I am not an elected official. I am not a member of the General Assembly. I'm not a mayor. I'm not a county commissioner. And those elected officials are going to have to stand up and say, yes, I support this tax increase. And they're going to have to be on the record if they expect it to pass. It's easy for me. I just have to pay the bill, but I'm willing to pay the bill. And it leads me to the argument. I don't know if your committee or the staff of CMAP, somebody needs to be doing some opposition research, because there will be organized, strong, effective, financed opposition to tax increases. There always is. They'll be there. They'll be whispering in legislators' ear, the governor's ear. They'll be strong. And if you approach them and say, look, everything's fine with transit. It's fine, leave it alone. We're good. We're happy. Just give us the money. I think it's a losing proposition. I mean, there are too many sound bites that they have to come back at you with, do we really need 4 agencies? Do we need 47 board members who pay compensated $800,000 a year, appointed by 21 elected officials? Is that the best way to run transit? Do we really need a dozen or more lobbyists in Springfield to represent 4 transit agencies? So that's going to be out there. And if you're not prepared to address it, I think the whole thing's in trouble.
Would agree with you wholeheartedly. And it's not just us, it's the General Assembly. I mean, they've said explicitly exactly that.
That was the
And-
point I was going to make too, is that this action or this call to us is from the General Assembly. So I would think politically, if they did that just to appease some people, they've asked us to come back to them with recommendations. But we've all dealt with Springfield and know in the final analysis what they may or may not do. But I think, as you mentioned too, Frank, 2 things are going to come back to them. It's not just a money thing. We all know the money's been shortfall of that for a long time, but it's going to be the efficiency things and some specifics and numbers that show going forward, possibly how, we can function as a transit agency in the metro area at the best efficient way, justifying the money. But it's really them. They asked us to do this. So the cards are going to be laid back on their table with these recommendations, and then we will see, where the pushback is, because I think the support certainly from the Civic Club, and we appreciate what you guys have done. And the participants on these committees, subcommittees, come from all walks of life and do represent, the metropolitan area. So the pushback is either, well, it starts with them and ends with them. They can do it or they can't do it. So I think.
Well, yeah, but you're not suggesting we just throw them the report and walk away.
No, absolutely not.
campaign.
And I think that's why they went to this agency, as we have done in the past, in backing up good plans. For example, the whole 12 billion tollway rebuilt. It took a while to do that, but it was this agency that backing them up, I think, settled the dust somewhat because of the toll increases. And it worked out. And it's a good plan, and it's from a roadway standpoint, and my comments about the agency itself, but because I think the credibility of this agency to the region is what gave the support for that project to go through. And I'm hoping that's what I'm thinking, that, yes, we need to follow up, whatever the recommendation is finally going to be that convincing body to the region that this is what, for our survival, this is what we need.
And I think part of the strategy is gonna be, after you've defined what these potential revenue streams are, is once it's presented.
Turn your microphone on, sorry.
Very low tech, sorry. Developing a strategy for advancing it, lobbying, for lack of a better term, making sure leadership is on board first, outreach to the various caucuses, and explain to the caucuses why this values their constituency. But I think there needs to be a plan of how do you do this? How do you be aggressive? How do you make that case? And then enlist their support. Start counting noses, basic, how you get legislation done. So I think that's got to be a component of it at some point.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks. And I just wanted to say, because now is as good a time as any, and I really appreciate Tommy being back and Randy. It gives me even more faith in where we're headed with this program here. I just wanted to point out, you did say a couple things like reform to company revenue, and it's a holistic approach, and efficiencies are essential. And I think as long as you stayed focused on that, then the rest will come and it will get our buy-in from it. In the past, we've kept a lot of the political side out of it. And I just hope keeping focused on those areas that you mentioned will actually continue to keep that side out of it and end up with the best result possible. So it is reassuring that you guys are here to lead that charge. And I just want to, again, thank you.
Thank you. I just want to note a few things though, and reality is, because Springfield asked us to do something, we certainly should do it, but it doesn't mean we have to agree with all the notions of it. Our job is to come to a conclusion that we can all get behind. And this isn't the only study that's being conducted about funding right now. The RTA has a much longer standing and more comprehensive look at potential funding streams. So this isn't the only one going on at the same time. So it is our job to find, I wholeheartedly agree with Frank Beal. We are underfunding transit. There is absolutely no doubt about it. We have for years. One thing that I've pointed out during this process is there are literally millions, if not tens of millions of dollars in the suburbs right now of unaccounted for transit activity that the suburbs have been subsidizing for decades that have not been included into a comprehensive report and should be. And we need to look at that as well as part of this process. There's a lot of notion that wiping the board is somehow the right conclusion right off the bat. That isn't necessarily true. We also need to pull back and say, what is the best solution overall? And what are the obstacles to some of those notions that are already built into this? This isn't the first study that's been done on this topic, and it probably won't be the last. And, I don't know to need to be snide, but the reality is Springfield has hundreds, if not thousands of studies that are sitting there getting dust. If Springfield wants to do this, ultimately we'll do this whether we say what we think or not. And this wouldn't be the first time that Springfield has not done anything with something that this body has suggested. And sometimes they have. And so we need to be realistic about it. We also need to be realistic that these funding sources that are being presented have other competitors that want to utilize them. Not only are there political obstacles of them, there's realities that there are other projects, other things, other initiatives that will also want to seek these funding sources for their own uses. And they are legitimate and possibly very worthwhile causes as well. So we need to account that for in this study as well. I know that topic's been brought up at some of the other meetings, and that the realistic nature of some of these funding sources is probably not as realistic as it may seem. So that needs to be accounted for in here as well. There are lots of needs out there right now. The state is doing better, and I commend the administration and the current legislature on getting us to where we are. They've done an amazing job of getting us to a point where we can have a different set of conversations, but there are still lots of needs out there, and some that will also compete for these same funding sources.
I would just on some of the comments, on the governance piece of this, and Randy will talk about this. It's been a taboo for a long time, and I think it's really heartening that this steering committee is looking at, the national best practices, what the pros and cons are of any changes. And if you look at the last 4 times that governance was studied, we did it in 2014 3 times, even in 2003, in the group that had congressional representation that helped create CMAP. One of their big changes that they recommended was governance changes. So I think across the board, we all know that we don't have the perfect governance. I think we've been a little bit gun shy about talking about governance, and there's still, there's antiquated stuff in there. I challenge anyone to remind me or, tell me the story of why to be on the PACE board, and no offense to my mayor friends, the only statutory requirement is that you are a mayor or a former mayor. I think that's a great requirement. I don't know if that's the only one that we need to be on a suburban bus board. Those things haven't been investigated or thought about for a really long time. And I don't know if there's a bigger crisis that's coming for transit for us to sort of rip off the Band-Aid and say, what is transit in a post-pandemic environment? What is important for the entire region, and how do we achieve it? And governance has got to be a key consideration in doing that. And again, the General Assembly has tasked you to do it. So I think that's important.
You know, I think, to that last point, I think it's really important that we stress the fact that we've got 2 years. You know, that this cliff is real, it's massive. And I think to your point about opposition research, or, you know, that has to be first and foremost. This first page that you did, the 20% budget cut, 40% service cut, I think could be very, very powerful. I mean, if we map that and we say who is going to be affected, to your point, workforce development is really, really important. And this is going to be a non-equitable impact. And so I think we need to have, as part of all the good work that's being done, a focus on, you know, doomsday.
One last comment before we move on to Randy is that, in some of the comments made, and Tom just brought it up, this organization was formed under the exact powerful congressional committee who looked at that time how agencies itself in the Chicagoland area could function. And it worked out. CMAP has done exactly what it was set out to do. I'm not going to get into the potential politics of what other recommendations come forth with the agencies, but understand, and there has been reports from the General Assembly, or they have on their desk small reports, or they have reports. I think this is truly to take in the comprehensive nature of what this is going to represent, metropolitan wise. And no matter what you say, it does get down to the General Assembly appropriating money. We've had some great years with monies, or with things getting done because of money. And we said that from day one. When this agency was formed, you can plan all the things in the world, but if you don't have the money to back it up, it ain't gonna work, or it's not going anywhere. And I think, again, the recommendations here, whatever they may be, will also affect the business community. If you're talking about potential taxation on services, which was in opposition in the past. So I think if you look at the big picture of what can come out of this, and who it's going to affect, and the support behind it, covering the obstacles or covering the negatives, it could be very significant. And I think messing around with the RTA formula, when I first saw that formula, I couldn't figure it out. You almost had to be a mathematician to figure out how everything, but it was also political too, very political, obviously. And what didn't happen when we formed this agency, and why there was opposition to merging PACE and CTA, which would make sense, I guess, to make it truly a metropolitan bus service, was backed off because of politics. But I think we've got to get over that hump, Frank, and that's something when we get a final report that as a board to recommend, and certainly afterwards for a board to support and to get behind the whole community here to convince the General Assembly this is the right path. Amen.
Mayor Browley.
I just had one comment, thinking of looking back to this, right or wrong, I should say that. I think that overarching, I feel that there are some. And I don't know if all of the people, have definitely faced the argument, but the talking point that they are pretty efficient now. And I don't know if that's the kind of feedback that the three boards are giving, on the working critics. I don't think that's going to help get anything across the finish line. If that's truly the position, or and it could be super efficient. There's no way to prove it. If that's the case, it's going to be much harder to find. Yeah. I think everyone is on public office.
All right.
Don't think.
Still have time, Frank.
Well,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
recognizing that we are going to be way short on time, but I think the discussion is the most important thing that we have here. I'm operating on the fly, and I think what I'd like to do is maybe have our team record the presentation that we had planned to offer you today, that we will send it to you. And sort of like I alluded to at the beginning of the meeting, I'm going to need to schedule meetings with you all, maybe in pairs, to go through it, answer your questions, because we have been digging in, building off of what the RTA has in their transit as the answer report, looking at the financial revenues, and then thinking a step further and really trying to make this holistic and bringing in the land use side of this as well. So if that's okay with my team, I think we'd like to call up Mr. Blankenhorn, who is going to talk to, I don't know if anybody's
Okay,
met him before, who's representing the steering committee, how to implement it, working discussion group.
Thanks,
Steve,
Eric.
welcome, my friend.
It's
We're here in the beginning and you're back with us at a critical.
bad penny never goes away. It is weird being on this side of the table. I'm used to sitting up there. But it's thank you and thanks to the staff for all the work that they're doing. This is not easy. I'm going to say this right up front. My group is the How to Implement It group, which is dealing with things like funding formulas and what are we going to do about governance? Is there a need to change the way we think about it? How are decisions made? And I want to start by saying, if we were building the transit system in this region, it would not look like this. The system would not look like this at all. We need to start to think about transit as one system, not three individual systems with an oversight board. The public doesn't care about three systems. They will care about getting from A to B efficiently and easy and as cheaply as they can. And that's the way we have to start to think about this. Tom said it's true about the funding. Funding and this has been broken for a long time. This is not new. This is not a pandemic problem. Funding has been broken for a long time. Parts of the rest of the system have been broken for a long time. We were in declining ridership before the pandemic. It's exacerbated since. We have to reimagine what transit is going to look like and how people are going to use transit. The markets are changed. People aren't coming downtown. The metro system is not going to look like what it did before. So how do we implement a system, one system that serves the new markets, the new needs, the new way of doing business that we're seeing out there? We are looking at governance, but we also realize that, it's a tough lift, that how we think about it, because to a certain extent, it was set up to protect people's investments. The way the formula works is based on the money comes from here and it goes to there to a large extent. And so we're protected about where that money comes from. When we talk about recovery ratio, which our group thinks is important to have, but maybe not at this point, because we want accountability in the system and how we make sure that people are getting their money's worth out of it. We are looking to you for a little guidance, to be honest. I know we don't have a lot of time today, but we are struggling with the question of how do we make a system, a governance system work? Is it the same? Do we increase the RTA's powers a little bit? Do we do things completely different? Do we leave them alone and rearrange the deck chairs, which I don't think anybody wants to do? But how do we think about the governance piece of it? I will be the first to say that good governance does not necessarily translate directly to a good system, and bad governance does not directly relate to a bad system, but it helps. It enables it to happen. And so when we talk about the trade-offs of more consolidation, more centralization, we're talking a lot about what issues ought to be regional versus operating system oriented. When we think about the long range planning for projects and the trade-offs that you make, things like the red line versus the Metro Electric, are those regional issues or are they a CTA issue and a Metro issue? How do we think about how those decisions are made and how do we create a system where those decisions make sense? I think you're going to hear a little bit about a new way of thinking about regional rail. And so I use this example a lot. I've used it with the staff that, if we have 20-minute headways on Metro now on the Northwest line, I can go to Jefferson Park on the Blue Line, or I can go on Metro. And we've got to make that regional decision about how that makes sense because it's going to impact CTA or it's going to impact Metro financially. And if we leave it to them, they're going to react in their best financial interest, which is their job, right? So how do we think about what are truly regional decisions, regional activities, and giving a regional authority like the RTA the ability to make those versus what are more day-to-day operating, what are more day-to-day, and then the old issue of who makes decisions at what level? How do we appoint board members? Does any of this make sense in 2023? On the funding itself, on the allocations, we are working on a funding distribution formula that is 60 years old. Who would run a business and not change the formula after 60 years? Doesn't make any sense. We need to think more about a needs-based approach to how we allocate money. And again, how do you do that while guaranteeing that our operating agencies and our operations have the funding to do what they need to do? So these are the issues that this group is dealing with. We're trying to be bold. I completely agree with Tom and what Frank said a little bit, that we have one shot, I think, to do this right. I don't think this shot comes again because I don't think the General Assembly will ever deal with this magnitude of shortfall in funding again. I hope. And so when we're going to think about this in that holistic way, and we think about how do we be bold and practical? How do we think big and give something that the General Assembly can pass? How can we give something that all of our leaders can get around and say, this is the right thing to do for us? And I think I'm looking for a little bit of advice from you on how far are you willing to go? What are the most important things for you as a board who is ultimately going to have to approve this? And what are the trade-offs that we ought to be thinking about as we look at some of these issues? So I will leave that to you, and I would be glad to hear it now. I'm happy to meet with any of you individually to talk about this in your own personal feelings. But I'm telling you, we're on a very short time frame, and without your advice, we're going to do what we want.
Well, Randy, I think the biggest statement you made, and you know this, is that, you know, how bold you want to be, how can we let things go that have happened and restricted all of us in the past? When you think about this, the metropolitan area, years ago, because it was so political, why a train coming out of an L train coming out of downtown, as they were building new expressways, didn't go out and extend into the suburbs because there was a political boundary at the border. Think about that. You go to other regional, just as a simple example, you go to other regional metropolitan areas, trains run out from the city to the suburbs, Atlanta, Philadelphia, New York, wherever. We never did that in this metro area because it was all based upon politics. Things stopped at the border here. They stopped at the border, whether it was Chicago, the suburbs to the county. And that's how bold you have to think about this. And the funding formula, to take a look at what really, from an efficiency standpoint, you know, can take place going forward. It is so crazy. The more and more I thought about whether John out southwest, why when they built the Stevenson, the train didn't go all the way out to Bolingbrook or Romeo, or to the northwest or the west or the south suburban areas along corridors that had the opportunity when they were being built to do that because it was all politics. And I agree, we are way behind it. Again, this agency was formed under a bold move. And I think we proved that we can work in a region, Chicago, suburbs, and the county. We've done it. We've proven it. I hope we're over that hump regarding transportation and so-called governance about what's the best move forward. What is it going to take to do that, and how as agency recommendations to the region?
I mean, the truth is that our service boards do the job that they're designed to do, which is look out after themselves, right? That's what Metro does. That's what PACE does. That's what the CTA does. And RTA does as good a job as they can managing all of that. But that's their job. That shouldn't be their job. That should not be the job of a transit system. The job of the transit system ought to be, how do we give the best service to the people that we serve and the people that live here and the businesses that we serve and the people that need to get from A to B? And not, are they writing the CTA? Are they writing Metro or are they writing PACE? And I think that's what we're trying to struggle with is how do we create a system that allows that one system approach?
Done.
Yeah, I don't think the question is, do you want to be bold? You always want to be bold. But I also cause caution that one group's efficiencies is another group's cuts. So, you know, that's always an interesting buzzword, but it often relates to different things at different groups depending on where they're at. You know, as I pointed out, you know, the suburbs, you know, there are countless, you know, park district, municipal, township, county services for transit that have gone unaccounted for, that have been subsidizing the lack of investment in the suburbs for decades. And, you know, I agree that this funding formula is probably not correct, but it, you know, my view of what that form of funding formula might be is probably different than some others in this room. And so I need to caution that. I'm also really reluctant to ever change a governance structure just for the sake of changing a governance structure because you want to be bold. You know, I think this entire study has shown that there are lots of efficiencies and gaining efficiencies in cooperation amongst the various transit boards. And time and time again, we've talked about that throughout this process already. And the fact that they were probably at a point where they cooperate more than they probably ever have. And so that's interesting as well. You know, and I don't know how many times we've heard that a restart of governance somehow is some magic formula, and I agree. A centralized governance or change of governance doesn't necessarily mean better service. I wholeheartedly agree with that. And so, we also going to be cautioning that a restart of any governance also means a lot of obstacles, a lot of hurdles. I used this example several times already when there was a consolidation on the PSAPs and the 911 boards. I was heralded that this is going to be some great efficiency. What happened? People started calling in, and I've heard numerous stories about this, to consolidate PSAPs. They didn't know where to send the calls. We had multiple unions being merged into one, tons of fights and debates. Years later, there's still problems. So a consolidation or a merging of governance isn't always necessarily the easiest of things. You have different pensions systems, who then takes on whose debt. There are all kinds of things. And I'm also always worried about limiting the number of voices that any kind of restart of governance could do. Today, we do have a lot of voices. That's not necessarily a bad thing. And we talk about $800,000, and it's always the easy thing to go and point out the costs of a board member salary or something like that. That isn't going to change even one probably fixed line pay service. So we always focus on a tiny portion of the thing. The reality is we have a funding problem. Governance is a secondary thing. We have had a funding problem. We continue to have a funding problem. We've always had a funding problem. And governance, there's probably some very simple things that, look at, taking the Ventra system and giving it to RTA. That's probably a very simple thing. There are definitely tweaks that can occur. And I think anybody who doubts that there's tweaks in governance is kidding themselves. But to simply say a sweep of governance is a solution, it doesn't, that's not really our real problem. Here is this fiscal cliff. And really, we had this problem before the fiscal cliff. The reality is you can't talk about efficiencies when you can't give reliable service to an entire region because transit lacks service, period, because there isn't enough funding. And until we have enough funding to create reliable service, we won't have reliable ridership. And so I think the one thing we can all agree and hopefully agree on is that we need to be bold when it comes to funding. And find ways to go above and beyond so we can actually talk about where efficiencies really could be created.
We need to move on here. We also have another member of the group, Amy Reinel.
Thanks, Jerry.
Executive Director of the Active Transportation Alliance, to express some comments. Amy, welcome.
Thank you for happens everywhere. Thank you for listening to all of the hard work that we've been doing and for CMAP's help on this. As we prepare recommendations for the legislature and for you all, we can't do that without facing the service challenges right in front of us that existed before COVID, have been exacerbated by COVID, are currently further complicated by our changing travel patterns, and are not meeting the needs of current riders, of past riders, and of future riders. So the system we want working groups that I work on with Jackie Grimshaw are working on what is the system we're asking for this money for? What is the system we are asking to be governed in the best possible way? So we've been looking at what will get riders back, what will allow current riders to have the service that they deserve, what will strengthen our economy as it relates to getting to jobs and to supporting our families. So we're looking at buses, we're looking at fares, we're looking at transit-oriented development. How do we use all that land around our stations for maximum effect? How do we look at regional rail and making the system more nimble and responsive? When we talk to riders, myself being one of them, every day, I could have a blog every day of service challenges, just in my own commutes on the west and south sides. That is not the system we want. That is not the system we want to be asking for more money for. So when we look at how these interplay with one another, Mr. Beal talked about, we haven't been putting, a number of you talked about this, we haven't been putting money into the system that we needed to for a long time. And we are feeling that today. The less service reliability we have, the less service frequency we have, the less affordable that system is, the fewer riders we have. You can't depend on it as your source of transportation. So the past decisions we've made on funding are really hurting us today and really hurting us as we head into making harder, really important funding decisions. That cliff might be in 2 years, but the rider issues are today. And so we are looking at what role the state can play, this body can play in improving services today and putting us on a path for the future. The state plays a huge role in this beyond money. They control our roadways that these buses are on. They control policies that allow speeding things up, like how we enforce or set aside land. So we are working on not just how we fund this, but how do we make the system more efficient and really more effective for the riders? We've heard a lot from riders about this. How do I get from Austin to my job on in a suburb west of Austin? So a pretty fairly direct route, but multiple bus connections. And if one of those connections is missed, that worker's late. And you can only dedicate so much time to your commute. But there are ways to speed that up. So we're working on that. We'll talk more about sounds like we'll talk more about our solutions that we're digging into later. But I just want to emphasize how interconnected this all is and how coming back to you and back to the legislature with a more comprehensive approach to the system we want, we think is part of the pathway to getting what we want and to succeeding. We are seeing progress to this end. We're seeing some nimbleness at Pace and Metra in innovating around different routes, moving beyond the loop as the central part of our system. But we have to do so much more to make this a world-class system again. And we are way behind our other cities. Peer cities, smaller cities, neighboring cities are launching bus rapid transit lines, for example, and doing things that are really quite amazing. So if we're going to get old riders back, get new riders, get people out of cars, which we haven't talked a lot about climate today, but that is going to be absolutely crucial to our climate plans in our region. I think some of you have been involved in that work. We have to get people on transit, and we have to make it a system that responds to our multiple travel needs. So I'll stop there, see if there are questions.
Thanks,
Lot more
Amy.
to say
And
about
I
what we're doing
know
there.
due to time, that we will get the report out to the board members.
Yeah, I think our plan will be to record the presentation that we had planned to walk you through. I know I saw a few of you flipping through the slides, but to give you greater context around the recommendations, the strategies, the sales tax on goods versus broadening the base and thinking about services and modernizing our tax structure, but also thinking about some of the recommendations that Amy was talking about, making sure that our DOTs are thinking about the fact that the roads facilitate our bus systems as well, and that there are very important land use implications that we need to be thinking about if our transit system is going to be responsive, well-connected, and really think beyond just the central loop. Because, while I saw in Cranes last week that we are trending in downtown office badges, we're still 40% plus down in terms of people coming into the loop, and I don't see that changing.
Actually, and one thing and I've said this as well, that I want to commend this study on. I think one of the best things that's come out of this is the focusing, as you talk about, the success of things like bus rapid transit and the really resiliency of buses, even through a period like COVID, and how easily we can adjust, how the public itself and the ridership seems to, bounce back for that more readily. And then this notion of protecting these corridors, and it's something I brought up as well. And when this initially came up talking about not only IDOT and the tollway, but I really brought up in this also to the PACE board that we need to continue this through county DOTs, even municipalities on major corridors, and start thinking in terms of not just what we're going to build tomorrow on a roadway, but what we're going to may potentially build in 30 to 50 years. We have major corridors throughout the region that do not have protections or right-of-way set-asides for transit, especially bus transit, and looking at those long-term possibilities. And I think it's one of the best conversations that's come out of this entire study, and I really applaud the study on that.
Yeah, so I just want to offer a few comments. I really love some of the recommendations that we're seeing in this presentation and in the report. As somebody who takes public transit every day, not just to get to work, but also on the weekends, I use it at grocery shop. I also, as a professional, spend millions of dollars at the city of Chicago, infusing the community with dollars to make sure there's more development around transit because it is so important. And that is something I've said on this board many, many times, whether you like it or not, that TOD, ETOD should be a component, not even just in Chicago, but in the region as a whole. And I hope that we look at those types of solutions. Again, it's so interconnected, especially as you talk about climate, with having a more coordinated effort across the board in all these different regions in order to make sure that people can access, like you said, that person from Austin who wants to go to a West Side suburb, they should have access to that West Side suburb just as easily as they can get to the loop, right? And so I just want to make sure that we keep it open. I think we all have an open mind about this, but just pushing ourselves about the challenges, because I'm not afraid of a challenge. I know it's hard to think about how do you restructure the system, but my entire life has been about burning down systems and rebuilding them. And I think we should have that same mindset of thinking outside of the box about what we can do in the region to do this. And the city of Chicago is right there to hold everybody's hand across the finish line if you need it. And I personally volunteer myself if you have any additional questions, because the city of Chicago has many investments in this particular aspect of how we're thinking about transportation, but then also development around transportation.
I just want to make one comment because I don't know if it was a conscious effort, the order of which you presented, but it kind of, my brain works a little different in that I actually think you should have been first, Amy, from the standpoint of how I see it is the system and how we want the system to look, then how do we fund the system, and then how do we govern that to make sure the funding is secured and used appropriately to accomplish that system we want. So I don't know
We'll do
if
that
that,
next time.
okay, thank
We
you.
were accommodating schedules this morning.
Okay, thank you. That's just how I'm hoping it goes from here, but thank you very much.
Amy, thank you. Randy, thank you very much, guys. I know we're going to be talking a whole lot more about this. We're kind of at a point now where I think there's going to be absolutely a lot more discussion. But thank you all and the committee for all the work that you put into this report. And we look forward to, again, working with you in the future. Thank you very much. Moving on, under legislative update, John. There you go.
Good morning.
Morning, John.
As you're aware, the General Assembly adjourned its spring legislative session sometime around 3 a.m. on the Saturday of Memorial Day weekend with the approval of the $50.6 billion budget. Aaron noted some of the general trends in this budget and what we're keeping an eye on for FY25. I know that LGDF is important to many of you. The FY24 budget increased the distribution rate from 6.16% to 6.47%, which is projected to increase the allocation to local governments to $112 million. This is far away from the 2011 10% contribution rate, but the larger increase, it's larger than last year. Additionally, we made significant progress, I think, on the legislation to gain financial support for CMAP appropriation to support our non-transportation work. Ultimately, the proposal was not included in the FY24 budget, but for the first time, we made significant progress and our proposal was quote unquote under consideration. We're going to continue to work on that. We appreciate your efforts to contact your legislators on this issue during the session, and we'll be discussing internally how we proceed forward in the next session of the General Assembly. Mayor Bennett, Mayor Noak, we especially appreciate your support, reaching out to your legislators and key leaders in the General Assembly, and we'll continue to call on all of you as we move forward. In addition to the budget and to the CMAP appropriation requests, there were a few transportation-related bills that advanced at the end of session. First, House Bill 1342 makes a number of transit-related changes. It allows the service boards to confiscate fare media and suspend riding privileges for riders that threaten public safety or commit public indecency. It requires the service boards to only enter into contracts for bus purchases for zero-emission buses starting in 2026. It enables a 2-year extension for the fare box recovery ratio requirement waiver. It requires the service boards to report on a number of performance metrics, including staffing levels, scheduled and delivered services, and safety on the system, including the number of incidents of crime. The bill also requires the RTA to study the feasibility of providing year-round free and reduced fares and creating a more equitable fare system. Additionally, House Bill 2068 passed both houses and is on its way to the governor. The bill requires certain employers to provide pre-tax transit benefits to employees. And another bill I'm sure you've heard of and are aware of is HB 2878, which is the Omnibus Procurement Bill. This legislation was filed in the Senate as an amendment to a House bill. The amendment includes a number of changes to the Public-Private Partnership for Transportation Act, including removing the reference to MPOs in the statute and language that requires 3P projects to be compliant with the regional plan. While the state cannot change the role of MPOs, which we're federally required to do as part of the transportation planning process, we would prefer this language be reinserted into the legislation, be retained in the statute. And that's a goal of ours. We expressed our concern to the bill's sponsor, Majority Leader Hoffman. He agreed with us. We were told it was not the intent of the legislation to be in conflict with federal law. And he agreed to work with us in the upcoming veto session on a trailer bill to address our concerns. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
John, thanks. I know I was in touch with you a lot over the last month at the General Assembly and all the work you guys, time you spent down in Springfield regarding our funding. I agree. This is really the first serious shot that we've taken to get funding from the state of Illinois. And I think we know, you know a little bit better the players and who to see maybe in January when the budget and the budgeteers are formulating a budget going forward, that we speak to the governor and or the House and Senate finance people to, from day one, to begin to insert that into the budget itself. I know the pushback I got was, and I talked to the governor briefly about it too, was like, how much? So again, how we approach that going forward with maybe a palatable number for them versus what we would like to see are two different things. But anyway, we'll talk about it.
Well, we've already begun, and we're using the summer to contact legislators, key legislators. We appreciate the sponsorship of Senator Villalon and Senator DeWitt, both of whom have been very helpful to us in this legislation. And in fact, meetings start next week with various legislative leadership to educate them and to convince them of the necessity of this legislation.
Good. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
All right, under other business, any other business for the board? Public comment? We will first take public comment here in the room.
Good morning, everybody. This is Garland Armstrong, formerly of Des Plaines, now in Des Moines, a resident of Des Moines now, and I'm back in the Chicagoland area. Came back yesterday, and now me and my wife are now staying at the Mainstay Hotel and Suites in Schaumburg, Illinois, for a while until June 22nd. And I was just want to echo what Randy and Tom and Amy says, especially what's going to be happening in 2026. And I know Leanne, who's part of it too, that my biggest concern is I think we should have a straightforward progressive data on everything, what is happening right now. So maybe you should tell the federal lawmakers, see this firsthand, and then when they see it, talk to the state lawmakers in the region to see what is going to be happening next. And they're going to ask themselves, are we extremely well prepared for this? Because they don't have no ideas of this, because I think the time, like you say, is going to be right now, because I think the federal, the state, local stakeholders to everybody should all come together like this so we can make sure that this will not be the biggest 2026 catastrophe of them all, because God forbids there will be a thunderous protest over this, because everyone said, what is happening right now? What and why is not the business and the corporate sees this? Because they're dodging it. But down the road, the business and the corporate will see the reality of it. I think you need to tell them to get your ears ready, because it will be coming, the biggest one of them all. So they need to understand and show it to them also, because they have no ideas of it, because just want to make sure that you will be telling them everywhere, not only here in the state, but maybe sure go to other cities and states to see, are they extremely, use the word extremely well prepared for this? Because this, when 2026 comes, God forbid, it will happen in other cities and states, and they will see, I told you so, and only time will tell. They won't be able to understand it. It's gonna be a big catastrophe, and they fail on it. So that is my suggestion, and I hope they're gonna be earmarking to be well prepared for it, because we don't know what's gonna be happening down the road. So God forbid, and pray for it, so we can make sure we have a great balance and be well prepared for this. And just wanted to say to you, Leanne, make sure tomorrow you tell representatives from CTA Metro Pace to be there, because it's like an emotional bittersweet for us. 2 years since we left here, moving to Des Moines, so we're glad to be back. So make sure to have representatives there so we can all have a picture taken, because it's gonna be bitter emotional, including Chairman Dill and everything. And over there at Pace, me and my wife will be there on the 21st. So you tell everybody to band down heads, just have the pictures taken before we leave on the 22nd. It's gonna be bitter emotional. And I want y'all to know that we are glad to be back in town as tourists, and it's so glad to see new staff and current ones emotionally sweet. And we want to thank you. And the post office right here, it is definitely awesome. And we're thrilled to be glad to be back in the Chicagoland area as tourists. And thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, Garland. Good to see you again. Yes. Any comments from the virtual world? Oh, I'm sorry.
Good morning.
Good morning, Heather.
My name is Heather Armstrong. I also live in Des Moines, Iowa. And I think you guys need to make a high corporate tax. So you can high corporate tax, high rich people taxes, so that they can pay their fair share. And make sure that the transit doesn't go away. Especially when you guys told us, we're talking about like, so we don't have what happened in San Francisco or even in New York. Because their financial burdens are going downward. And we need corporate tax to make sure that we would still have transit, especially in the further out suburbs in the collar counties, where they threaten to cut services there. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Any comment from the,
Do we have any online virtual comments? Looks like the answer is no. So
okay,
moving forward.
so again, we will sayonara for the summer. We'll be back in September, and we will be meeting on a Wednesday, September 13th on the second floor in the what is it called? The Marquee Room?
Yeah, in the marquee
It's
room.
a joint meeting of ourselves and the MPO Policy Committee, so I'm sure everybody will be there. I thank everybody for coming down, participating. Jim, good luck to you. And with that in mind, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion adjourned.
Second.
Moved and seconded. On favor, signify in usual manner.
Aye.
Shared meeting adjourns. We will quickly meet in executive session right now
In the DuPage County room.
in Page County Room.
Executive committee, not executive session.